Alright, here we go. And we're off. Oops. The video timed out. Okay.
Okay, we've passed that cactus 3 times now. It is the same cactus. We're going in circles. Let me see the map. Dear Tim and Moby, what is an ecosystem? From Georgiana. Well, this desert is an ecosystem. It's made up of living and non-living things that interact with each other. Lots of times, ecosystems are categorized by the amount of rainfall and sunlight they get and the condition of the soil. Deserts don't get much rain, so they have very little water. Plants and animals that live in the desert have to be able to survive without water for long periods. And the sun is intense. Moby would overheat every day if he lived here. Desert soil is delicate and not very good for growing things. Even with the hot and dry conditions, the desert ecosystem has its own community of plants and animals that have adapted. Cacti can store water, kangaroo rats sleep underground where it's cooler, and owls prey at night when the sun goes down. In an ecosystem, communities can be divided into different populations. Populations are made up of just one type of organism. Every organism has its own home that's called a habitat. Yikes. I guess a scorpion's habitat is in the sand. Water? Oh, right. There are water ecosystems too, like ponds, lakes, rivers, and oceans. Ha! Got it! Wait, this is your map? Well, this is a subway map. Yeah, you better start running.
Moby.
Hey, wait up!
Moby. What a trickster. What a guy. Okay, so a couple things to take away from that video. I the key word, the key terms that they introduced were community and population. Now, it's important to remember that although they both describe groups of living things, um, a community describes all living things that are in an ecosystem. So, if we're talking about a desert ecosystem, that desert ecosystem includes things like coyotes, scorpions, owls, cacti, any other plants that are in that particular ecosystem. So it's all groups of living things in that area, in that ecosystem. Whereas a population only looks at one species. So the population of owls, the population of desert hares, the population of cacti. We're only focusing on a specific living thing. And then the ecosystem itself contains all the living things as well as all the non-living things. Remember those abiotic and biotic factors. So we have different sort of we narrow the focus when we're talking about our different groups as we go from ecosystem down to population. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look. We'll do a little activity here right now. Where is it? Hold on a second. There it is. And in this activity, well, the first part we're not going to be doing together. I want you guys to come back to this later when we work on our biome projects, when we each get a specific biome to look at and analyze its living and non-living factors and among other things. But we'll be doing this later, so we're not going to do this first part. But we are going to do this second part here. Let me zoom in a bit so we can all see. We are supposed to categorize whether each phrase among this list of phrases, whether each phrase describes a community, an ecosystem, a habitat, or a population. Okay, so we have to assign one of these terms to each phrase. Okay, so let's start off with the first one. And for breakfast, Jake, I have not had breakfast yet. I'm waiting until after we're done with this class so I can get a little snack in before math. So herd of bison. Is a herd of bison a community? Is a herd of bison an ecosystem? Is it a habitat or is it a population? What do we think here? I can tell you one thing that it's definitely not a habitat. Okay. A herd of bison's habitat is not a herd of bison. So what do we think here? And we can type our responses in the chat. Population, ecosystem, or community? Okay, guys. If you guessed population, you were correct. It is a population because we're only looking at one species. In this case, we're looking at bison. We're not looking at a herd of bison and antelope and moose. No, I don't think moose and bison live in the same areas. But we're not looking at multiple different species. We're looking at one species. So population is the best word that describes this phrase right here. Okay? Let's look at the next one. Frogs, insects, and birds living near a pond. Is this a community? Is this an ecosystem? Is it a habitat or is it a population? Okay, if you believe that this phrase is a community, then you were correct. It is a community because we are looking at multiple different species. Uh, if and the reason why this is not a habitat is because although it describes the habitat in this phrase near a pond, okay, it doesn't actually specify the pond. It's focused on the frogs, insects, and birds living near a pond. Okay, so we're looking at multiple different species that are together in one area, and that will be a community. If it was a habitat, then the statement would say something like the pond where frogs, insects, and birds live. That could be a habitat, okay? Or it could be an ecosystem itself. I mean, the ponds are technically classified as their own ecosystems because there are different parts of the pond that different species can live. Okay, let's take a look at this next one. The plants, animals, water, and soil of a forest. Okay? So now we're looking at living and non-living things. All right? What would we just what term would we attach to this phrase right here? Okay, if you thought ecosystem, you would be correct. The reason why? Well, again, a population describes just a group that includes members of a single species. So in this case, a population of bison, we're only looking at the bison, no other animals, no other species. Uh, if we're looking at a community, we're looking at multiple species. But again, all of these species are living things. We're not looking at non-living things. When we go up to an ecosystem, we're looking at all the living things as well as all the non-living things of a particular area. Okay, so ecosystem is the best term to attach to this particular phrase because it lists living and non-living things. Okay, let's look at the next one. The kelp forest where sea otters live. We're focused on the kelp forest, not the sea otters. What do we think this phrase describes? Okay, if you were thinking that this is a habitat, you would be correct. Okay? Uh, it's a habitat because it describes uh, an area where a specific organism lives. Okay? It's a habitat. If we were going to go back to one of our earlier phrases and change it so it described a habitat, you could say the prairie in which a herd of bison live. That would be a habitat. That prairie is the bison's habitat. In that same sort of context, the kelp forest where sea otters live is a habitat itself for the sea otters. Okay? Good morning, Miss McGee. Alrighty, guys, let's move on to the next phrase. All the hummingbirds that live in your state. All of the hummingbirds that live in your state. What do we think this would be? A community, ecosystem, habitat, or population? Okay, if you were thinking that this is a population, you would be correct. You would be correct. All right. And why is it a population? Well, we're only looking at one species here, all the hummingbirds. Now, population isn't limited by any specific size of area or size of location. We can describe populations in very small locations or populations in very large areas. So, each state has its own population of people. However, you can look at the individual populations of cities as well and narrow it down from there. The same thing with other organisms as well. You can look at the hummingbirds in just the park, the population of hummingbirds in your local park, or you can look at the population of hummingbirds in your city or in your state itself. So population is not necessarily limited by size. Um, so the only thing you need to make sure you're looking at is that the whatever phrase you're trying to determine is describing, in this case population, we ought to make sure that the phrase is only talking about one specific species. Okay? Alrighty. Let's take a look at the next statement. Oh, excuse me. I had a sneeze. I had to mute myself. So, excuse me. Alrighty. The next statement. Fish, eels, and lobsters living in a coral reef. Okay, we're focused on the fish, eels, and lobsters. We're not focused on the coral reef here. So, what term does this describe? Does it describe a population, community, ecosystem, or habitat? I'll give you guys a second. Okay, so if you were thinking that this is a community, you'll be correct. Again, the phrase that we're looking at is describing, the main subject of the phrase is the fish, eels, and lobsters. And if we remember, a community describes all the living things within an area. Okay? In this example here, the living things listed are all in this coral reef area. Okay? So we would describe this phrase as a community. Okay, next one. A dying tree with holes that animals live in. A dying tree with holes that animals live in. This is a community, ecosystem, habitat, or population. Okay, if you were thinking that this dying tree is a habitat, you would be correct. Habitats can be, very large or very small. They can be part of an object or structure or the whole thing itself. So habitats can be pretty varied. However, if we're reading the statement as a whole, uh, whole, um, a dying tree that animals are able to live in can make a perfect habitat for different animals, depending on what it is. I mean, I don't think an elephant can make its habitat in a dying tree. However, something like a bark beetle could probably do really well living in a dying tree. Something like maybe a small rodent or perhaps an ermine or a weasel can live in a dying tree with holes, so it can be a habitat for many different organisms. Okay? Okay, so the last statement that we're looking at is well, let's read it right now. Wetland plants, animals, and marshes. Wetland plants, animals, and marshes. Okay, is this a community, ecosystem, habitat, or population? Okay, if you thought this was the ecosystem, you were absolutely correct. Uh, and this might be tricky because, oops, excuse me, had another sneeze coming up there. All right. Um, so this phrase is describing an ecosystem, um, and it's tricky because at first it lists off just living things, right? Plants and animals, okay? But then it also includes marshes, and marshes are not living things. It's a specific type of ecosystem itself, actually. If only they just said everything inside a marsh, all the living and non-living things inside a marsh, then no, we could also describe that as an ecosystem. But yes, so marshes are not living things. Plants and animals are. when we are defining something as an ecosystem, we're looking at both the living and the non-living things in that particular area. So this is an ecosystem. All right. Uh, let's uh, let's refer back to our little lesson from yesterday. We'll continue from there, and then I will post an activity from the workbook that we can all complete for our assignment today. So let me first load this up here. I don't know if you guys can hear my keyboard. Maybe, maybe not. All right. So if you remember from Monday, we finished off talking about biotic factors and abiotic factors. Um, biotic factors being anything that's living or was once living in an environment, and abiotic factors being anything that is non-living in an environment. Okay, and an ecosystem looks at examines both the biotic and abiotic factors within an area. Okay, let's move on. So now we're going to be looking at populations, communities, and ecosystems, which we just sort of did in our warm-up activity. And here we have a great picture of a pond ecosystem. Okay, why is this an ecosystem? Why is this not a population or a community? Well, if we're looking at all of the living and non-living things in the area, let's take a look at what we have here. Oh, what the heck happened? Why is this? Why is it? Why did it go all gray like this? Let me refresh and see what happens. All right. Okay. Open the bullet points. Go back. All right. So now our picture is reset. Uh, excuse me. So this is a pond ecosystem. It's got dragonflies. It's got fish, frogs, lily pads. It's got cattails, snails. It's got some herons here. It's got whatever this plant is right there. Apparently has a lotus. There's a log right there. There's some grass in the bank. There's some trees in the background. I mean, all these living. There's tons of living things in this area. You might think it's a community. However, we can see that there's water, sunlight. There's clouds, so there might be some rainfall later. There's soil along the bank, right? So we're looking at both living and non-living things in this photo. Now, if we're focusing on just this frog here, well, if we're just describing frogs in this pond, then we're looking at a specific population. What is happening here? Okay. Oh, it's demonstrating some stuff for us. All right. So, uh, I wonder if I can refresh this because it's kind of going automatically. All right. Okay. Oh, I see what it's doing. It's graying out all the stuff. All right. I wonder if I could stop this thing and do it automatically. Here, let me zoom out a little bit. Okay. So again, it walked through the different types of organization, starting from smallest to largest. So let's refresh that and look at that again. One more time.
Organization within an ecosystem.
All right. How do we? Is it gonna go automatically? Do we have to wait? Maybe not. I want it to do its thing again, but I guess it's not going to. All right. Well, let's move on. Okay. So, uh, let's take a look at these different terms here. We gotta fill in the blanks here for a bit. So, if two animals can produce fertile offspring, they are members of the same species. Okay, that's when we were looking at that last image or last page. Uh, the image grayed out everything else and only highlighted a single frog. That frog belongs to a species, and if if two members of those species attempted to reproduce and create offspring, they would both be members of the same species. So, again, only animals that are members of the same species can produce fertile offspring. Uh, well, you might ask yourself, or ask me, but Mr. Holden, what about animals like mules? What about mules? Mules are the offspring of a donkey and a horse. Those aren't the same species, but they can produce offspring. Well, I would counter that by saying a mule is not fertile. Uh, it cannot actually reproduce. This happens quite frequently between species that can interbreed. So things like lions and tigers, you could breed a lion and a tiger together and make a hybrid animal. However, those hybrid animals are not fertile most of the time. Okay. So mules, ligers, those animals are not considered fertile. They're not fertile. So, um, despite some animals from different species being able to produce offspring, uh, whether those offspring are fertile or not is really factors in. Oof, losing my train of thought. Okay. Populations of elephants, gazelles, lions, and zebras. Ooh, so once again, we are looking at the groups of individual species. So all of the elephants in an area that belong to the same species would be a population. So and so on and so forth with gazelles, lions, and zebras. Uh, so the populations of all those animals live and interact together in an area within the savanna. These populations of organisms live together in a community. Okay? So remember, community describes all the different populations that live in an area. Okay? Let's take a look over here. Next paragraph. Organisms interact with one another and the non-living things in their environment. Together, all the living and non-living things in an area create a ecosystem. Okay? So there we go. Uh, we've identified species, populations, communities, and ecosystems. Let's move on to the next page. Well, actually, let's read this together. Oh wait, no. We already read that. It's the same thing. Okay. So which diagram shows an environment's levels of organization from smallest to largest? So we have to start from the very smallest level of organization and go to the largest. Okay. I'll give you guys a hint. The largest level of organization that we're looking at is an ecosystem. Okay. The largest level of organization that we look at is an ecosystem. Okay, so that rules out two of the options, these two right here. And we're looking at either the third diagram or the fourth diagram. So let me walk you through these. If we're going from the smallest level of organization to the largest, would it be organism, a single member of a species? Uh, and then moving on to population, which is all the members of a species living in an area. Moving on to community, which is all populations living within an area. And ecosystem, all the living and non-living things in an area. Does that sort of go from smallest to largest? Well, let's take a look at the next one. So do we start with organism, a single member of a species? Do we moving on to community, which is all the populations that live in an area? Moving on to population, which is all the members of a species in an area? And then ecosystem, which is all the living and non-living things in an area. Okay, if you were thinking that this first diagram that I described is correct, then you would also be correct. This is the level of organization from smallest to largest. The smallest is an organism. It's just a single living thing that belongs to a species. Moving on to population, which is all of the members of that species in an area. And then we move up to community, which is all of the population, so different species within an area. And then ecosystem is all the living things, so all the populations and all the non-living things. So the temperature, the sunlight, the water, and so on and so forth. Okay? Let's move on. So here we have again some more practice. We have our terms and we have different images that are attached to them, but they're not actually correct. Okay, so we need to rearrange these pictures so that they are appropriately attached to the right term. Okay, so the first term we get is a population, and they give us a single gazelle. Or we have to move the terms around. We don't move the photos, okay? So, let's take a look at the first image. This is a single gazelle, okay? What do we think we should put below this photo? Now, population is not correct. So we have either organism, ecosystem, or community. So we have a single gazelle. I'll give you guys a moment. Okay, if you were looking at this photo of a single gazelle and saying, hey, that's just a regular old organism, that's just a single living thing in a photo, and that's it, you would be correct. So we're going to go ahead and switch around. Well, let's move this around too. We'll switch around this. Oh, and we got this one correct too. Okay. So an organism is just that single individual living thing. Okay. It's not in a group, it's just by itself. However, if we find all of the other members of its species in an area, we can then describe all of those individuals as being the population of gazelles in that area. So population is correct here. Moving on, we have ecosystem under a picture with all these animals, and then we have community. Okay? We're going to switch these around because remember, communities describe only the living things, okay? And I only see living things in this photo. I don't see things like rocks or water or sunlight or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and put community under this photo, right? And that will be correct. And by doing so, we've also established that this last photo here with the elephant, the zebras, the gazelles, the soil, the sunlight, I don't know if there's water here, but there definitely are some non-living things in this photo. Soil and rocks being the first and foremost. So this is an ecosystem. An ecosystem includes all the living and non-living things in an area. Okay? And apparently this is a springbok antelope. A springbok antelope. Interesting. Let's actually learn about this.
A springbok antelope is an organism that lives within a population of other springbok antelopes in a nature reserve in South Africa. All of the different populations of organisms, such as elephants, zebras, and various plants, living together on the reserve, is called a community. All of the biotic and abiotic factors together make up an ecosystem.
Okay, so that pretty much describes the images that we just looked at. That comes from a nature reserve in South Africa. Huh. You know, it is my dream to one day go on a safari in one of these savanna ecosystems in Africa. My grandma did it when she was in her 70s, so I should be able to make it out there alive. Once I find the opportunity, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna dress up like Steve Irwin, short shorts, boots, a nice collared shirt, tough wool socks, and I'm gonna go around looking for living things. Man, that would be a lot of fun. You guys let me know what ecosystems you would like to visit or areas you would like to visit to see the wildlife. I'm definitely interested to know that, see what you guys are interested in. But for me, it's the savannah. I mean, I just love the fact that there are so many large animals. Um, so many impressive and distinct distinctive organisms and species live in that particular biome. Hold on, guys. I'm just pouring my coffee. I'll get back to my computer here in a bit, and we'll continue. Ooh, don't spill. Don't spill. All right, we're good. Okay, coming back. Let's see if anyone responded with areas they'd like to visit. You like the Wizard of Oz ecosystem? That's not a real ecosystem, Jetson. What are you talking about? Oh, jeez. Okay, let's move on. Okie dokie, and here we go again. So we are. Let's read. Go ahead and read the prompt that they give us at the top.
Dr. Tarran wrote the following questions for his study of an African grassland environment. Drag each level of organization to the question that it fits.
Okay, so again, we got to drag the right level of organization to each question. So let's read the first question.
How could a fire affect the air quality and food resources available in an African grassland environment?
Okay, so how could a fire affect the air quality and food resources available in an African grassland environment? Interesting. So food resources would definitely be important to living things, right? Okay. And we know that living things only ever eat living things, okay? And if you think about that for a second, you know it's true. The only non-living thing that other animals consume is salt, really. Everything else they get from another living thing. So we're looking at living things in the first question, but then they also want to understand the effect of a fire on air quality. Is air a living thing? I don't think it is, okay? It is not. So this first question is addressing or focused on living and non-living things in an African grassland environment. I believe that an ecosystem would be the best term to attach this first question because ecosystems include living and non-living things in an environment. Okay? Next one. How does an ostrich keep water in its body in an African grassland? Well, so how does it keep itself from going thirsty and losing water and becoming dehydrated? Well, uh, first off, what is the question addressing? Is the question addressing a community, multiple species, multiple types of organisms? Is it describing or focused on a population, so all of the ostriches in this area? Or is it focused on just the ostrich as an individual organism? Okay, if you thought that this question only addresses an individual organism, you would be correct. Okay, we're only looking at an ostrich or just the ostrich species, um, and we're examining a specific behavior in an ostrich. We're not looking at all the ostriches in an area. We just want to know something about an ostrich. Okay, next one. How could a fire affect the number of different species in an African grassland? So this question is focused on different species in a grassland. Um, Now, because we're looking at more than one species, this question is focused on the community, right? And then by process of elimination, we know that population should be attached to the last question, but let's read the question just to be sure. What causes the growth or decline of the number of ostriches in an African grassland? Um, well, we're looking at one species here, ostriches, but we're looking at all of the ostriches, okay? We're discussing things like growth or decline of ostriches. We're focused on their population, okay? And you'll often see people describe populations as growing. This is a growing population of ostriches, or as a declining population. The population of giant pandas is declining. The population of coyotes is growing, right? That's what we usually describe populations as. All right, let's move on. Okay, so how is a population different from a community? Uh, Remember, a population describes all members of a species in an area. It describes all members of a species in an area. So, for example, let's go right here. The number of, let's do the number of coyotes living in the San Fernando Valley. Okay, that's a population. We're only looking at one species. We're only looking at coyotes. Okay, and we're looking at it in a specific location. All right. Now let's define a community. So a community would be describes all of the populations in an area. Okay, all of the populations. So example. Well, actually, let's bold this. So remember that coyotes are the species we're looking at. That's the population we're looking at. And the area is the San Fernando Valley. Okay? So they're bolded to correspond. So community describes all the populations in an area. All right? Since population only describes a single species, when we're looking at more than one population, we're also looking at more than one species. So all of the coyotes, raccoons, and we'll say rats in the San Fernando Valley. Notice how not much changed. I could look at the same area and look at an individual population, or I could look at that same exact area and focus on the community, which is every single living thing in that area. Okay, so that's the main difference between. That's the difference between a population and a community. And it's actually true that coyotes are the populations of coyotes are growing. They're kind of becoming like pigeons. Pigeons are actually they've adapted really well to living closely with humans, and coyotes are now adapting to live more closely with humans as well. So coyotes are actually extending their ranges, or the areas that they live in, and starting to move into cities and towns. So I would say if you live on the edge of any particular area of the valley, like maybe closer towards the hills instead of in the center, I would watch out for your pets, and make sure that they're not outside during the night so that coyotes don't attack them. Again, this is not going. This is gonna keep continuing this way. Coyotes are getting more and more comfortable living closer to humans, which is just a sign. It shows you that life is resilient. It's a good sign, I think. Obviously it's unfortunate if a coyote kills a beloved pet, but the fact that coyotes are adapting and learning to deal living so closely to humans means that life life cannot be stopped. Oop, you've completed the daily challenge. I don't want to see my bonus. Close. Okay, so we're gonna do a check for understanding right here. The different levels of organization in an environment include individual organisms, okay, populations, communities, and the entire ecosystem. The levels of organization become more complex as more abiotic and biotic factors are considered. Okay? So let's do some vocab check. And we'll just, you guys respond with either 1, 2, 3, or 4, whichever one you think is correct, okay? So, what is an organism? Is it a group of living things, an individual living thing, an individual's living area, or a group of non-living things? So either 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'll give you guys a second. Okay, if you guys thought organism is an individual living thing, you'd be correct. So this would be 2. An individual living thing. A group of living things is not an organism. It's more than one organism. So, Jake, unfortunately, you missed this one, but it's okay. This is why we do this practice. Let's move on. What is ecology? Ooh. This is a tricky one. This goes back from what we talked about on Monday, okay? But let's see if you guys remember this. So, is ecology the study of how organisms enter outer space? Is ecology the study of how organisms interact with each other and with their environment? Is it the study of all biotic factors, so all living things in an environment? Or is it the study of the makeup of an organism's body? Okay, if you looked at this and thought, oh, hey, I know this. Ecology is the study of organisms' interactions with each other and with the environment, then you would be correct. So, ecology is indeed the study of how organisms interact with each other and with their environment. Okay? uh, the ecology looks at the non-living things as well, not just the living things. Okay, so that's why 3 is not correct. We're not looking at just the living things. Ecologists also look at the non-living things too. So the availability of water, the climate of that area, the amount of sunlight it gets in given times of the year, so on and so forth. The rocks and minerals available. Um, a lot of things to consider in an environment besides just the living things. Okay, we'll move on. So what is a habitat? Is a habitat all of the populations of different species that live and interact in an area? No, it's not. I just gave that one to you guys. Is a habitat the natural environment that supports the life and growth of an organism? Hmm. Is it a community of living organisms and their non-living environment? Or is it the artificial, meaning man-made environment that supports the life and growth of an organism? Okay, if you thought that it was the natural environment that supports the life and growth of an organism, you would be correct here. Okay, a habitat is where an organism generally lives. It generally lives in that area, and it chooses that area to live in because it is suitable to support the life and growth of that organism. If you were a if you were a zebra on the African plains, your natural environment, your habitat would not be near a den of lions. That would not support your life and growth. Your habitat would be an open grassland, an open field, where you can see any organisms approaching you, where there's grass for you to eat. All right, so it's helping you survive because you can keep an eye out for predators, and it's also giving you food. So that's how we describe a habitat. It's an environment that supports the life and growth of an organism, and it can be very big or very small. The habitat for a worm that supports its life and growth is usually under rotting logs or under rocks, right, in the soil, because that's the area that it knows it can live in and grow in. Alrighty, continue here. Let's go on and take a look at this one. And a biotic factor, not an abiotic, but a biotic factor is any non-living component that does not affect an organism in an environment, any non-living component that affects an organism in an environment, any living organism that does not affect another organism in an environment, or any living or once living thing in an environment. Okay, it can't be number 3. Number 3, any living organism that does not affect another organism in an environment. Organisms are constantly affecting each other. Okay, uh, if this goes back to Monday, so I know it's been a couple days since we've talked about this, but a biotic factor is any living or once living thing in an environment. Okay, anything that is alive or used to be alive. And on the flip side, an abiotic factor, we know that that is anything non-living in the environment. We're just going to go through this one really quickly. Abiotic, it is not alive, and it never was alive. Alrighty. So a rock, a pond, Those things are not alive, but they are part of the environment. Okay. We're gonna stop actually right here. We're not gonna go any further than this. So I'm gonna stop here. Let me pull up the Google Classroom. There we go. And there is a worksheet that I want us to complete today. It discusses the levels of organization that we talked about today. So it discusses organism, population, community, and ecosystem. But it also goes into another level, a higher level, that we will be talking about in future lessons. And that higher level is called the biome. So if you remember our original diagram, well, I can't pull it up right now, actually. Um, actually, you know what I can do? Let me just go ahead and post it, because I think I have something here. Assignment. This is exercise 77, levels of organization in ecology. This is going to be due by Friday, and I'm going to attach it right now. Alright, uploading. Okay, and it's assigned. So let's take a look at it really quickly. There it is. So again, I want to draw your attention to these different levels of organization. We start from the smallest right here, an organism, just a single living thing that belongs to a species. A population, which is all members of that species. Community, all of the different populations in an area. Ecosystem, all of the living and non-living things in an area. And finally, biome. Biome is the next step up that we have not really discussed. It's not been introduced to us yet. The definition is in your book, and I would ask you to define it, but I wouldn't think too much about it for this assignment. We will be looking into biomes later, but for now we're focusing on the levels that come beneath it. Okay? So, this is your assignment. Again, you can actually, you'll have to probably print this out or draw your own table and then scan it or take a photo of it and upload again. So, um, I apologize if it's inconvenient, but I will need to see this entire worksheet filled out so that I know you did it. Okay? Alrighty. And with that, I'm gonna stop recording. Well, actually, I'm not gonna stop recording. Um, One thing I want to draw your guys' attention to, if you are watching, let me go back down to the Chapter 13 quiz. I made an announcement about this on Monday, but only one person responded. So let me go up here. Responses. Remember, I told you guys that I'm not able to see who did which quiz. So if you look at this list right here, this is all of the different people. These are all your quizzes here. Basically, they're listed from 1 to 12. Response 1, 2, 3, 4. Only one person went and added their email to their quiz. So that would be Crystal. Crystal's the only one who went back in. And so you could see that right here, she went back into the quiz, and at the very top, it asked her to type in her email address, which you can do. You can also type your name, I think, but email address is fine. Whatever you type in here will pop up in my response menu right here, and I'll see who did which quiz. Okay. So again, this is my fault. I should have looked into Google Forms a little more closely to figure it out. I thought I would be able to see who did what, but apparently I cannot do that. So everyone needs to go in to their quiz. So for example, this is response 1. I don't know who did this quiz. You'll have to open up your quiz again, and it'll have all the answers. You don't need to retake the quiz. You just need to go in and type your email. Wherever it allows you to type. Yeah, you can just type your email address right there, and then it'll show up in my list, and I'll know who did which quiz. Okay? So please get that done. Otherwise, there's gonna be some incomplete quizzes. No, I won't do that. I'll just. I'm not gonna change your grade. You're not gonna get points off for this. If anything, I should get points off for making this mistake. Alrighty. So again, here's your assignment for today, as well as just a reminder to make sure you get your email turned in so I can give you your quiz grade. And that should be it. On Friday, we'll go over a couple more things in ecology, and we'll hopefully finish those questions on Moby Max here. So we'll finish those definitely. And yeah, maybe we could do a hangout instead on Friday. But oh well. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording right now.